Hey everybody, it's Professor Diarmus and Professor Devo. Say hi, Devo. Hi everybody. Okay, let's get down to business. Um, so I am going to be talking to you about the rest of Hamlet right now, and I want to just get through the rest of the play and talk to you about like what some of these things mean, and so let's get right down to it. Okay, it's good to see you all again. I hope you're doing well. All right, so in Act 4, Scene 3, remember, Hamlet has killed Polonius, and they're all looking for Polonius's body. When Hamlet comes in, and he tells the king that, the king's like, hey, where's Polonius? We need to find Polonius because, this is a problem. Claudius has the unfortunate situation where he's in love with Hamlet's mother, so he doesn't want his mother to, like, suffer. And, like, if Hamlet's commit murder, he's going to have to, like, pay for that. So if they can just bury Polonius and get the body out of the way, they're going to be able to hide it better. Sorry, now my dog's bothering me. Okay, I'm back. Claudius is really, interested in this. So Hamlet comes in, and then Claudius is like, hey, where is Polonius? And Hamlet tells the king that Polonius is at supper where he will be eaten by worms, meaning, oh, he's, at supper, meaning his body, when maggots and stuff, they eat you. Then he goes on this, like, really funny thing where he says, in front of everyone, when a king dies, he becomes food for the worms, and then, a fisherman might use one of those worms to catch a fish, and then, like, a beggar, like the lowest person, the guy who's sleeping under a bridge, he might eat that fish, and then that fish turns into beggar poop. So he's like, and the Claudius is like, why are you telling me this? And he says, oh, just to tell you that, how a king might become beggar shit, which is funny because he's insulting him. He's saying you are the poop of a homeless person, which apparently is the worst kind. But I think what's interesting here is that Shakespeare's taking this moment to remind us, we are dust, and to dust we will return. That this play about mortality, this play about life or death, to be or not to be, to kill yourself, to not. It all comes back to this kind of very graphic idea that you are in a mortal coil, to use Hamlet's words. You're part of this human meat shell made out of bones and meat and muscle. But inside, you have this thing that's ethereal, this thing that is more than that. We are not the sum of our parts. And Hamlet's really wrestling with those two things. So, Hamlet says, in heaven, he says, so Claudius is like, I've had enough. He goes, where is Polonius? And Hamlet says, in heaven. Send thither to see, because you're not going to get to heaven. You have to send someone to see it. If your message find him not there, seek him in the other place yourself, because you're going to hell, buddy. And that's pretty funny. Excuse me. That's pretty funny because he's saying go to hell in a very fancy way. But if indeed you find him not within this month, you shall nose him as you go up the stairs into the lobby. So he tells him, he's like, you're going to smell him eventually if you can't find him in heaven or hell, because I stored him in the stairway over there. And Claudius to his attendants goes, go get him. And Hamlet says he'll stay until you show up because he's dead. So there's all this morbid humor, too, there, which is really funny. Or not, but, I mean, it's fictional people, so it's not in poor taste. Claudius then decides we got to get, he's killing people now. We got to get Hamlet to England. And he tells Hamlet, he goes, we're sending you to England, buddy. And Hamlet says, good. And Claudius says, you would not think it's good if you knew our purposes. Kind of tipping his hand, like, going, like, if I had enough of you, like, get ready for what's about to happen, because Claudius is planning to have people in England kill Hamlet. Hamlet says, I see a cherub who knows your purposes, which means, maybe he's talking about the angel. A cherub is a baby angel, but or maybe he's just trying to be, the ghost of Hamlet's father, or maybe he's just trying to pretend to be crazy. But anyways, he's like letting him know, I'm on to you too, pal. So he then leaves by saying to his new father, Claudius, farewell, dear mother. So he calls him a woman, and in a sexist world in the 1600s when this play was written, or 1700s, that would be an insult. So he says, farewell, dear mother, and Claudius, like, says, thy loving father. And Hamlet does this real fun thing here. He says, my mother. Father and mother are man and wife. Man and wife is one flesh, because when you're married, you're supposed to become one person, right? And so my mother, come for England. So, and he means go to England. So he's doing this double talk, this like, am I crazy, am I not? This performance. Claudius Claudius is going to write this letter to England now, and he says, hey, you owe us money, this tribute thing. And he says, instead of paying me money, you're going to pay me in deed. You're going to kill the bearer of this note. Kill Hamlet when you get this. And Hamlet's going to carry this note that's been sealed, and Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are going to take him there. And then that'll be how that's figured out, you know, like that the bearers of this note will be going that way. Sorry, I'm just stroking my mustache. So then we get to Act 4, Scene 4. So Hamlet's on the way to England, and on his way to the dock, he runs into Fortinbras's army, who's walking across. And if you do the geography, it doesn't make sense, but he's walking across Denmark in order to go to Poland. Okay. So Hamlet asks what the mission is, and there's a captain that says they're risking it all for this really small patch of land that the soldiers couldn't even be buried on if they all died. That it's like. And Hamlet goes crazy about this. He's like, what an honorable thing to risk so much just for this thing, right? This pride. He's like, you know, he's got this, like, you won't take anything from me. I'll take my land back thing. And Hamlet admires that. Again, Hamlet doesn't act. So Hamlet admires Fortinbras because he has this capacity to just do it. And Hamlet says 2,000 souls and 2,000 ducats for what? Pride? And Hamlet's impressed and inspired by Fortinbras. And he has this whole, like, speech that he says. And Fortinbras a character foil to Hamlet, right? And just to remind you, a foil is a character that shows qualities that are in contrast with other characters. And the objective of this is to show these two people are so similar, but there's this one thing that's different. And when you see Fortinbras, you see Hamlet. He's a young prince who's lost his father. And he's got to do revenge. But Fortinbras moving. He's already got an army going. And Hamlet's still in that should I, shouldn't I kind of thing. So Hamlet has this soliloquy, and I'm going to read a little bit of it because it's his last one and it's important. He says, he looks at Fortinbras and he compares himself to him, kind of what a character foil is supposed to do. And he says, how stand I then, that have a father killed, a mother stained, because he's always about this sex thing, excitements of my reason and my blood, and let it all sleep? While to my shame I see the imminent death of 20,000 men. He's like, to my shame, I see all these guys willing to risk everything, and I'm still like, should I, shouldn't I? That for a fantasy and a trick of fame go to their graves like beds. Fight for a plot wherein the numbers can't even try the cause. It doesn't even make sense. He says, oh, from this time forth, my thoughts be bloody or be nothing worth. So now he's like, now I'm going to do it. And we're already in Act 4. It's like, I don't even buy it. Like, Hamlet does so much ego stroking to try to get himself to go and do something. It's just another case. I mean, we've had to be or not to be. We've had, oh, this too solid flesh should melt. Now we get this, oh, I got to do it because someone, and if there's one thing about Hamlet, there is this kind of pride thing. He doesn't want to be outshined by anyone. So when he sees Fortinbras doing the thing he's been asked to do, he feels bad. He's like, by comparison, I don't match. But he's comparing apples and oranges. Hamlet isn't a Fortinbras. Hamlet isn't a Laertes. If you want to compare Hamlet to someone, you should compare him to Ophelia. Because they're both emotional. They're both people who, like, care about other things than, like, victory and triumph, right? And that's kind of what Shakespeare wants us to think about. So now we're in Act 5. So now, Act 5, Scene 1, the queen doesn't want to speak to Ophelia. She's heard some weird stuff about Ophelia. And remember, Ophelia, what's happened to her? Well, she agrees to kind of, like, you know, fall in love with Hamlet, and she's got this thing, and she agrees not to see him anymore when her father forbids it, and Laertes tells her to be careful, and then Hamlet pulls the turn on her and, like, tells her, I never loved you, and give me back, you know, I never gave you these gifts, and kind of gaslights her in this way. And then in front of everyone during that play, he, like, it's nice to lay between a maiden's legs, and he's being all loving with her. We're in the scene, you know, he's back and forth, and what's that going to do to your brain? Especially if you're someone who just lost a father, right? Because that happens in the next scene. So she's already kind of teetering there, and then Polonius is killed not by just anyone, but by Hamlet. And Ophelia knows that Laertes has to come back and avenge her father's death. So now she's going to have to wait around and see the one man she loves and the only family member she have left decide which one of those, you know what I mean? Like, so Ophelia breaks. And it's sad. And the queen, for whatever reason, doesn't want to see her. And the attendant of the king tells Gertrude, her speech is nothing, yet the unshaped use of it doth move the hearers to collection. Meaning she's saying, she doesn't make sense, but it's like, people want to listen to what she's saying. She botches the words to fit up her own thoughts, which as she winks and nods and gestures, yields them. Indeed, it makes one think that there might be thought in it. So Shakespeare's kind of telling us through this, like, side character. Listen to what Ophelia's saying. So Horatio, who we all gotta love, right? I do. I understand why Hamlet loves him so much. Convinces the queen, thank God, to see Ophelia, because it's kind of callous of the queen not to, especially considering what her new husband and what her old husband have done to Ophelia, and what her son. I mean, I think Gertrude should be more concerned. So maybe that has something to do with her guilt. Maybe she feels like she's responsible for some of this, or helped the people who are responsible. However, Ophelia starts singing these songs, and I think these songs are really important, so I want to talk about them. She says, how should I, she's just in there, and she's like, lost her brains, she's lost her wits, and she's singing this song, and it seems to be like some random thing, but I would argue that it's not. How should I your true love know from another one? By his cockle hat and staff and his sandal shoon. So this question is, how do I know who loves me? Which is a real Hamlet reference, right? Because like Hamlet said he loved me, he said he didn't love me. And she's singing this song about it, and it would be a song you would know back in England in this time. But it's a song about a gentleman. It's like, how do I know who my true love is? Well, your true love better be a gentleman, because you don't want to marry one of these homeless people, right? Then she switches to another song about death. And remember, Polonius, her father, has just died. And she says, he is dead and gone, lady, he is dead and gone. At his head a grass-green turf, at his heels a stone, which misunderstands the way you bury someone. You put the stone where their head is, and their feet is where like all the grass would be. She says he's been buried backwards. And in a way he has, right? Because he didn't get a funeral. Claudius just like grabbed his body and shoved it in the ground to cover it up. The king and King mark that Ophelia's lost her wits, and then we get more singing, and the singing's good. So she keeps singing about her father, right? She says, larded, which means decorated, with sweet flowers, which bewept to the ground, did not go with true love showers. So she's saying, oh my gosh, he had flowers in the ground, and he was buried, and no one poured rain on them, so they won't grow. And the king says, oh, she's mad because of her father Polonius's death. And then she starts singing about Hamlet again, and she says, tomorrow is St. Valentine's Day, talking about love, right? All in the morning betime, and I am made at your window to be your Valentine. So that there's this sneaking. You don't walk through windows, but she's like, tomorrow's Valentine's Day, and we're going to be in love. So I'm going to come secretly to your window. Is she talking about what she gave to Hamlet? Then up he rose and donned his clothes. And then after it was over, right, the sex, he put on his clothes and left the chamber door and let in the maid, that out a maid never departed more. That means she lost her honor, that she's no longer a maid. She should go to a nunnery, right? So she's kind of grieving not only the loss of her father, but the loss of her ability to maybe in this society at this time be with another man. She'll never be a maid again. She's not someone who has any value anymore because she can't offer her body unblemished to someone, right? Which is just straight up sexism, right? Because Hamlet's not less of a man, right? So then she has this other part that's really interesting. She says, the song is supposed to say by Jesus, but she says Jesus' name a different sexual way. So I'll just leave it at that. She says, by Jizz and Saint Charity, alack and fie for shame. Young men will do it. If they come to it, by cock they are to blame. By cock meaning in the morning when the cock-a-doodle-doo, but maybe it means something else. And then she says, tumbled would be a reference for sex. She says, quoth she, before you tumbled me, you promised me to wed, which means before we had sex, you promised we'd get married. He answers, meaning in the song it says he answers, what I have done by yonder sun, if thou hadst not come to my bed. So, like, why buy the animal when you can get the animal's milk for free? That whole stupid thing. She's kind of lamenting the fact that she fell for Hamlet's trick. Now, if you believe Hamlet's pretending to be crazy, she didn't, and that he really loves her. And maybe he wants her to go to a nunnery so he can go get her when all this is over. But if this is truly what Ophelia thinks, and Ophelia's going to kill herself, right? We know that. So these are her real thoughts, and she's really lost her wits. So this is what she believes. And if she knows Hamlet best, I believe, then he's really done a humdinger on her as far as, like, making her lose her sanity, or helping her to. And then when she leaves, she says, I hope all will be well. We must be patient, but I cannot choose but weep. To think they would lay him in the cold ground. Thinking about her father again. And then she says this, which is really important. She says, my brother shall know of it. Meaning, Laertes is coming. What's going to happen? They've got to fight. And then she says, and so I thank you for your good counsel. and it's the daytime, right? Because you meet the king in the day. It's not the middle of the night. And she says, come, come, my coach. And it's like a guy who would carry her bags. She doesn't have bags. She's hallucinating here. And she says, good night, ladies. And it's all men. And it's daytime. Good night, sweet ladies. Good night, good night. And she's lost reality, okay? So Laertes comes back in this moment, and he's all angry, and he's come back for his father's funeral, and it's already over. There was no funeral, and he rushes in, and his father's been put in without anybody's ability to mourn, and he's mad. Laertes is angry, maybe it's a better word to say. And he says, and the people who are like the attendants, you hear like bang, bang, bang on the door, and Claudius is kind of scared, and they say like, all the people in Denmark are with Laertes. His father was killed. They see something's up, and they're all like, Laertes should be king if he's going to kill the king. So this tells you that Claudius isn't like the rightful heir, and the people know that, right? The people are behind Laertes, and they want him to be king because he challenges Claudius, assuming that he should be the rightful king. It also shows that people think, and Laertes does, that Claudius might be in cahoots with Hamlet. We know that's not true. So Laertes busts in, much like Fortinbras. These are two character foils for Hamlet, who are both just men of action. Laertes isn't even sure if Claudius is done, but he's like, I'm going to kill you. Hamlet is all planning. He's like, let's test. Laertes didn't come in and say, let me think. But, he's like, I'll kill you, right? And he says this. He says, give me my father. Like, give me his body. And King Claudius is like, calmly, good Laertes. That drop of blood that, and then Laertes says, that drop of blood that's calm proclaims me a bastard. If I calm down, you might as well call me a man who's never had a father. Cries cuckold to my father and makes him like this guy who is a loser. Brands the harlot, even here between the chaste unsmirched brow of my true mother. And Claudius says, what is the cause, Laertes, of thy rebellion? Why do you come in here and do this? And Gertrude tries to stop him, and he goes, let him go, Gertrude. Do not fear our person. Because he knows he can use Laertes, and that's his plan. He says, tell me, Laertes, why are you so mad? Let him go, Gertrude. Speak, man. And Laertes is so mad. He's like, he's being held back, and he has swords, right? And he's like, where's my father? And Claudius tells him the truth. He says, dead. And Gertrude jumps in and goes, but not by him. She's trying to protect Claudius, right? And Claudius says, let him demand his fill. Let him ask my questions. And Laertes is like, how came he dead? I won't be juggled with. To hell with allegiance. It's a really important part to look at this because Hamlet never says these words. He never comes up to Claudius and does this. And I would expect him to do that because Claudius just lost his dad. Hamlet lost his father, who's a king, and basically his inheritance, his path to the throne, right? So listen to what Laertes says. I mean, this should be what Hamlet says. If Hamlet's Laertes, this is what he would say. Vows to the blackest devil. I don't care where I end up. I can go to hell for this. I don't care. Hamlet's like, shoot, well, I would kill myself but what if this devil is trying to tempt me to kill the wrong person, right? Like, Laertes doesn't care. Conscience and grace to the profoundest pit. I dare damnation, which means being damned to hell. To this point I stand that both the worlds I give to negligence. I don't care what happens in this world or the next one, even if there is one. Let come what may. Only I'll be revenged most thoroughly for my father. Whoa! Laertes, man, right? He's a man of action. He is not Hamlet. And then Claudius asks him, like, what should stop you? And Laertes says, only my will, not the world. And for my means, whatever I need to do to get this accomplished, they'll go as far with me as possible. And Claudius is like, yes. And he says, good Laertes, if you want to know the certainty of your dear father, and it's written in your revenge that you're going to kill friends and foe alike, winner and loser. And Laertes goes, let me correct that. I would only kill his enemies. And then Claudius says, do you want to know who his enemies are? And he says, to his friends, I'll open my arms open. And he goes, you speak like a good child. He's already making himself a father figure to him. And he goes, and a true gentleman. I'm guiltless of your father's death, and I'm in grief for it. I loved your dad. And then Ophelia busts in and interrupts this moment where you feel Claudius is trying to slowly manipulate and pull the strings on Laertes' grief, right? And Ophelia jumps in, and she's, again, lost her wits, and it's obvious. But this is the first time Laertes sees it. And he's, like, horrified. His sister's gone. And whatever this person is now is a shell of who she was. And Ophelia sees Laertes and doesn't even really, like, react the way you would. Like, oh, you're back. Our dad said. She just starts handing out these flowers that aren't even flowers to people. And a lot of people say that this is just random, but there's a lot of good critical essays. If you wanted to do the symbolic essay, this is what I would do. That argues that this is a symbolic act. Claudius asks Laertes to go on a walk with him. So the symbolic act meaning she hands certain flowers that have certain meanings to certain people, and you might want to think about what she's trying to say. Even if this is, she can't speak rationally, the gifts might be a symbolic communication. So email me if you want to write that paper, and I can help you think about it a little bit more. So Claudius asks Laertes to go on a walk with him to discuss the murder of Polonius, and you know what that's going to be about. Act 4, Scene 6. Sailor hands Horatio a letter from Hamlet, and in the letter it says, hey, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern were escorting me to England with this death note when pirates overtook the ship, which is true. It's crazy, but yeah, it happens off stage, so anything can happen. Hamlet jumps off ship. Before he does so, he changes a note to say that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are going to be the ones to die, and he talks about it later, and he's very proud of himself. Act 4, Scene 7. Claudius and Laertes make a plan to kill Hamlet without Laertes committing a high crime, because if he kills a prince, that's a problem. So Claudius, who's very good with poison, right, says, I can't tell you to do this in front of Gertrude, because she lives just for the face of Hamlet, and I don't want to make my wife sad and let her know that I make her sad. So Claudius is betraying Gertrude here. He's a piece of work, and he continues to be. So he makes this plan behind her back with Laertes. He also acknowledges in this speech that the general population of Denmark loves Hamlet, and that Claudius wouldn't be able to execute Hamlet in public without them revolting against him. While they're talking, Claudius gets a letter from Hamlet, a great letter. And it says, high and mighty, which is like hilarious, because really what you want to say is like, my lord. But to say high and mighty is condescending, right? Like, oh, you on your high horse, right? Like, high and mighty, you shall know that I am set naked on your kingdom. And that word naked is funny, because if Hamlet's lost his wits, there's a chance he might just be running around without clothes on. But what he really means is, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern don't have me anymore. I am naked of the clothing you forced on me, right? Tomorrow shall I beg leave to see your kingly eyes, when I shall, first asking your pardon, thereunto reaccount the occasion of my sudden and more strange return. Hamlet. P.S. Alone. Which means I need to see you alone or I am alone. But like, the point of this is, he writes him a letter to say, hey, I read that letter that you wrote for them. You know, now Claudius is really pooping his pants because he realizes Hamlet is aware of his plan to kill Hamlet. So, Claudius goes right back to Laertes and he says, we're going to accidentally kill Hamlet in this fencing match, right? This sword match like you see in the Olympics, right? And the people won't get upset, neither will Gertrude. We'll do it the right way. Give me a second. Hamlet's always been jealous of your fencing ability. I know, because I'm his uncle and I know these things. So, when Hamlet comes back, what would you undertake to show yourself? When he starts using Polonius' death as a way to manipulate Laertes into doing this, he says, because Laertes is a good person, you know. He's like, he doesn't want to like trick someone. He would rather like fight someone to the death, right, like fairly, than stab him with poison, which is what he's going to do. So he says, what would you do to be a good son to your father? And Laertes is like, I'll cut somebody's throat in the church, which is like the place you don't do that if you're going to do that. It'll make you go to, you know, the bad place. So he says, good, Laertes, keep this a secret, though. And when Hamlet comes back, I'll give you more discussion. We're going to, like, bet. It's going to be a place where we bet on who's going to win. And I'm going to bet on Hamlet's side to kind of cover our tracks so they don't think I'm with you. And Hamlet and you are going to fight for, like, entertainment and for the mother and as a way of, like, kind of, like, restoring each other. So we'll have you fight them, but we'll also poison the swords, because they're supposed to have these little balls on the end of them, these fencing swords. There was someone with a mask, and they're, like, on guard, that thing. In the Olympics, you don't really hurt people. You just touch them with the end of it. And that ball on the end of it is supposed to stop it from piercing you. But he's going to take the ball off and dip him in poison. The same poison he kills his father with, right? And then he's also going to pretend to gamble in the fight. And during the fight, what ends up happening is the first person to score a point gets a pearl, a very valuable pearl. And he drops the pearl into a glass of wine. And he says, whoever makes the first touch will get to drink this wine. And you get the pearl, right? It's a nice surprise. It's money, too, right? A pearl is valuable. So then all of a sudden Gertrude comes in when they're talking about this, and she tells everyone Ophelia is dead. And she says, one woe doth tread upon another's heel, which means, you know, Polonius is dead, and I hate to tell you this, but bad things follow each other, and now Ophelia is dead. The question is, did she commit suicide? If she commits suicide, she doesn't get a Christian burial. If she dies by drowning, then she can get, like, and they've already lost a funeral for Polonius. They never had it. So Gertrude does a kindness here by, like, I don't know if you think she drowned, but I don't think Ophelia drowned. I think Ophelia killed herself. And here's the story. Your sister's drowned, Laertes. Drowned? Where? And Gertrude says, there's a willow that goes ascant a brook. There's this tree, this really sad-looking tree, a willow tree, that grows right next to a brook, this river, and it goes over it. Remember how she was passing out flowers? She was collecting more with her fantastic garland she made of crowflowers, nettle daisies, and long purples. There on the pendant boughs, on the branches, an envious sliver broke. So one of the tree branches broke, and she fell into the weeping brook. Her clothes started spreading wide, and there's a famous picture of Ophelia that someone painted of her laying in the water, kind of like unaware of what's going on. But eventually her clothes will soak up the water, and that's what she says. Her clothes spread wide and mermaid-like a while. They bore her up because they had air in them and stuff. Which time she kept singing songs during la 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 la. And then one incapable of her own distress, or like a creature native and endued unto that element. But long it could not be till her garments, heavy with their drink, pulled the poor rich from her melodious lay to muddy death. And I think her garments are symbolic here. I think we can think about Ophelia's beautiful big giant dress as being like something she has because she lives in the castle, and it got her great joy, right? It brought her great things like Hamlet's love being there, but also they pulled her down to her demise, and so did Hamlet's love, right? So her dress and these flowers and things, these are all symbolic things, I think. And then Laertes says, alas, then she is drowned. And Gertrude is saying it over and over because she wants the kingdom to hear this. Drowned, drowned. She did not kill herself. It's drowned. I think she committed suicide, though. The significance of that is that she gets a funeral. So Act 5, Scene 1. We're finally in Act 5. Yay, all right. There's a really funny exchange in the beginning of this thing, but I don't have time to go through it, between the gravedigger, who's like the lowest person, you know, like you would say like a gravedigger is someone who's like a criminal or can't get another job, so he just, and they're not to be trusted, because once you bury grandma, the gravedigger takes her chain and her rings off and maybe anything that's valuable, right? So, but they discuss death as this great equalizer between kings and young people. And Hamlet and Horatio have met up after he comes back on the pirate ship, and because the pirates like him, and because he's a good dude, he hides and he looks at the gravedigger talking, and then he comes out and the gravedigger doesn't know who he is because the gravedigger doesn't like follow the news or anything, and he says, oh, do you know, he's digging Ophelia's grave, and Hamlet doesn't know it, and he says, oh, do you know who this skull was? Because people are buried in other people's graves, and he holds this skull up, and he goes, no, I don't know. Hamlet says, no, I don't know who this, and he goes, oh, a pestilence on him for a mad rogue, like, oh, I hated this guy, I wish he had a disease on him for being so bad to me. He poured a flagon of Rhenish on my head. One time he poured beer on my head to make everyone laugh. He was a court jester. And he says, and Hamlet again says, I don't know who it is. He goes, this same skull, sir, was Sir Uric's skull, the king's jester. And Hamlet stops. And he was having this like funny joke between him and Horatio and the gravedigger, who's like kind of dumb and missing the jokes. And he gets really serious. And we find out that Yorick raised Hamlet until he was 7, and then he died. And he's been in the earth since then. Hamlet's father also died. So this is kind of reminding him of the loss of his, kind of like his first father, his nanny. And he says, alas, poor Yorick. And this is that famous scene, if you've ever seen with Hamlet, where he's holding a skull and he's talking to it. And he goes, alas, poor Yorick. I knew him, Horatio. A fellow of infinite jest, meaning he had so many jokes, infinite jokes. A most excellent fancy. He hath borne me on his back 1,000 times, all these piggyback rides. And now he has abhorred in my imagination it is. He says, and now how awful it is to think that I'm holding his skull, that we're all reduced to this kind of mortal moment. And it also tells us that Hamlet had a happy childhood at one point. This really sad man who's mourning and obstinate in black, he was a child once who was laughing. He hath borne me on his back 1,000 times, and now how abhorred in my imagination it is. My gorge rises at it. Here hung those lips that I have kissed, I know not how often. Where are your jokes now, your gambols, your games, your songs, your flashes of merriment that were wont to set the jokes, the things that you made everybody laugh, where are they now? Not one to mock your own grinning. He says, now you're smiling forever, that, you know, because he's a skull, and he has, you know, no lips anymore. And he says, you're quite chapfallen. Now get you to my lady's chamber, talking about Ophelia, and let her paint an inch thick, like put on all the makeup she wants. To this favor, make her laugh at that. saying like, go. So you realize Hamlet doesn't know Ophelia's dead. He wants to know why the funeral is so meager, and Laertes walks up with all the king. They're having like a secret funeral, and Hamlet hides to watch. Again, more spying, more spying, more spying. And Hamlet realizes it's Ophelia's funeral, and Laertes is in great pain, and he's so sad, and we hear, this is really important. Gertrude throws flowers, and like Ophelia needs more flowers, throws flowers on Ophelia's grave and says, "Sweets to the sweet, farewell. I hope thou shouldst have been my Hamlet's wife." What? That, like, Laertes and Polonius were wrong. They said you could never be with Hamlet. But Gertrude was on board with that. He said, "I thought you would be the one to give me a grandchild. I thought thy bride bed to have decked with these flowers, sweet maid, not your funeral." Laertes tells the gravediggers to hold off pouring the dirt on her so he can hold his sister one last time, and he jumps in, and Hamlet is not one to be like outdone, right? Because if there's one thing Hamlet can do, it's grieve and mourn and be sad. So he's like, "What? You think you're going to jump into her grave?" Even though Hamlet's kind of responsible for this. Hamlet says, "What is he whose grief bears such an emphasis? Whose phrase of sorrow conjures the wandering stars?" He's like, "Oh, so you're saying such sad things that the stars are moving and makes them stand like wonder." This is Hamlet the Dane. They fight in Ophelia's grave now, like on top of her body. And it's pretty symbolic because that's what, that fight was what's killed her, And then Hamlet says this, "I loved Ophelia." 2 acts ago he said, "I loved you not." "Oh, I loved you. You shouldn't have believed me." And now he's telling the truth, right? Apparently, I believe him though. "I loved Ophelia. 40,000 brothers could not with all their quantity of love make up my 40,000 Laertes couldn't love her as much as I did. What will thou do for her?" And then Gertrude said, "Oh, don't fight him, Laertes. He's mad." And he says, "Would you weep? Would you fight? Would you stop eating? Would you tear yourself apart? Would you drink poison? Would you eat a crocodile?" Which is a weird thing to say. He says, "I'll do it. Dost thou come here to whine? To outface me leaping in her grave?" He's like, "Let's do it then. Let's bury ourselves under it. I'll die right now. Let's put a mountain on top of us." He's like, "You think you can outmourn me? I'm Hamlet. That's my whole deal. That's my brand." You don't want to, compete with Hamlet as far as being sad. He's the man. So he says, "Why do you do this to me? I loved you ever." He tells Laertes, "I always loved you. But it's no matter. Let Hercules himself do what he may. The cat will mew and the dog will have his day." And Hamlet leaves, and Claudius and Laertes agree that they should wait for the plan to go on. So, Act 5, Scene 2. We are at the last scene of the last act. This is it. Hamlet tells Horatio about how he reads the letter and how while Rosencrantz and Guildenstern were sleeping, he read the note and saw Claudius's plan to murder him, and he shows the letter to Horatio so that Horatio can say, "Yeah, this is the truth." Horatio asks Hamlet if, because now Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are still taking the note. They didn't get off the plan, and that note says, "Hey, kill Rosencrantz and Guildenstern." So they're just taking their note to the King of England. And Horatio says, "Do their deaths come near your conscience? Like, does this collateral damage make you feel bad? You didn't have to do that. You could have just escaped off the plane, the ship." And Hamlet says, "They're not near my conscience. I feel no remorse. Their defeat does by their own insinuation grow. They deserve it. 'Tis dangerous when the baser nature comes between the passing fell of mighty opposites. They should have never got involved between me and Claudius. We're too big for them, so their deaths are nothing." He is okay with collateral damage. Hamlet asks about Claudius and how awful he is, and and Horatio and he start talking about it, and Hamlet says, "He that hath killed my king, my father, and whored my mother, popped in between me and the election and my hopes," meaning stepped in between me and the kingship, which is kind of one of the first 2 times I think Hamlet talks about that. So there were plans to become king eventually. He says, "I don't feel bad about killing him." And then Laertes says, but I do feel bad about Laertes. He says this, and Hamlet shows remorse here. He says, "I'm very sorry, good Horatio, that to Laertes I forgot myself at the funeral. For by the image of my cause I see the portraiture of his. I see my reflection in him. Character foils. I'll court his favor. Be sure the bravery of his grief did put me into a towering passion," which means just seeing him so sad, it made me mad because I'm also sad and nobody could see my sadness. So he continues to kind of act crazy to the king's attendant, Osric, who's the new Polonius, because Polonius is dead. So he's like treating Osric the same way, and like pretending he's crazy and doesn't know what's going on. Osric tells him that there's a gentlemanly duel between Hamlet and Laertes to bring them back to like peace, and that Claudius has wagered a lot of like warlike, like guns and cannons and gold on Hamlet. That Hamlet's gonna win. The first guy to touch 12 times, that's what the game is too. So he says, Claudius has bet that you're gonna get to 12 before Laertes gets to 9. And Hamlet's like, damn, that's pretty good. I guess I gotta go out there and see if I can win. Hamlet's got some pride. So when Hamlet gets out there, before they start fighting, Hamlet says, give me your pardon to Laertes. He says, I'm sorry. I've done you wrong, but pardon as you are a gentleman. This presence knows, he's saying this in front of a bunch of people, you must have heard how I'm punished with distraction. He's like, you must have heard that I'm crazy. When I have done that might your nature honor an exception roughly awake, I here proclaim was madness. The things I did was when I was crazy. Was it Hamlet that wronged Laertes? Never Hamlet. If Hamlet from himself be taken away, and when he's not himself does wrong Laertes, then Hamlet does it not. Hamlet denies it. Who does it then? His madness. So Hamlet uses the insanity defense in 1600. Shakespeare's so ahead of his time. He's like, listen, I didn't murder that person. It was me crazy, which isn't me now. So you can't go find that person because he doesn't exist anymore. But just know it's not me. If it be so, Hamlet is the faction that is wronged. He's like, in fact, I'm also a victim to this. His madness is poor Hamlet's enemy. I was hurt by my enemy too, which is me. Sir, in this audience, let my disclaiming from a purposed evil free me so far in your generous thoughts that I've shot my arrow over the house and hurt my brother. He's like, I didn't mean to do it. I shot the arrow in the air and it landed and hurt you. And Laertes says, I'm satisfied by this apology. He says, I do receive your offered love like love and will not wrong it. So he forgives him. Hamlet's capable of remorse. So he apologizes to Laertes for killing Polonius. But he doesn't feel bad about Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. And he's not going to apologize for anyone else. So we get this character foil thing, which is, he actually says it. This is the line it comes from. He says, give me the foils, come on. And then Laertes says, come one for me. And Hamlet says, I'll be your foil, Laertes, meaning I'll be your sword. So Hamlet actually is a good swordsman, which is really important to think about. Because you could say that he's afraid of killing because he's afraid of dying, but he's not. He's actually better at fighting than Laertes in this match, at least. Hamlet hits first, and Claudius drops the pearl in the wine. Like he said, the first one to make a hit will get this pearl in the wine. And he holds it up, and he says, drink, Hamlet, because he wants to poison Hamlet. And Hamlet, for whatever reason, he doesn't know he's being poisoned, says, no, I'm feeling it. Like, I'm in a rhythm. I'll drink that later. Let's go. Let's do this again. Claudius has a bad plan. And Hamlet hits Laertes again. He's a good fighter. Maybe the problem with him killing is he's not a killer. Not that he's not a natural-born killer. Not that he can't kill, right? That's an important distinction. So the queen gets excited now. It's 2-0, and she jumps up, and she grabs the cup that Hamlet won't drink. That's poisoned. And she says, I'll drink to thee, Hamlet. And Claudius now is in front of his entire kingdom, and he realizes his wife is going to poison herself. And he goes, Gertrude, do not drink. That's all he says. Gertrude, don't drink it. And Gertrude's like, don't tell me what to do. I will, my lord. And she drinks the poison. And, you know, Claudius could have knocked it out of her hand. Claudius could have said, I command you. He could have said, it's poisoned. Because if he cared about it, but he does not care about anyone but himself and holding that crown on his head as long as he can. Power, absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? And that's Claudius, for sure. So, something to think about. When you're doing the fencing, there's a little ball on the end of it, right? When you take that ball off, it can stab you. It's a real sword. Claudius took the thing off the end of Laertes's and dipped it in poison. Hamlet still has a thing on the end of it. So the 2 touches he did to Laertes that never hit him. But now Laertes is like, I'll do it now. Excuse me. And he goes to hit Hamlet when play is suspended. They're not fighting. Hamlet's just looking at his mother, and he gets stabbed in the side. It's like it's just a flesh wound, but he's not dying from it. But he's been poisoned now. And Hamlet gets really mad, and he grabs the sword, and they switch swords, and he stabs Laertes. Like, how do you like that? And now Laertes is poisoned. So now Hamlet's dying, Gertrude's dying, Laertes is dying, Polonius has died, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are about to die. All these people. If Claudius would have just been killed when he was praying, none of that would have happened. Think about that. Hamlet's discomfort with his actions have cost so many people their lives. So, Hamlet gets angry and does that. Laertes falls, and he says that quote that his father said earlier. He says, as a woodcock to mine own springe, Osric. He's like, I'm poisoned by my own device. And then Gertrude falls down, and Hamlet goes, what's wrong with Gertrude? And the king says, she just swoons because she sees blood. She's just fainting because she sees blood. And Gertrude speaks up in her last dying breath. She says, no, I've been poisoned. It is the drink. And she dies. Hamlet says, lock the door. There's a traitor in here. And Laertes says, it's here, Hamlet. There's no other traitors. He says, no medicine in the world can do thee good. You art slain. I stabbed you with the poison. In thee there's maybe a half an hour of life. The treacherous instrument is in thy hand. That sword is the thing that has poison on it. Unabated, meaning that balls off of it, and envenomed, meaning it's been poisoned. The foul practice hath turned itself on me. Lo, here I lie, never to rise again. And your mother's been poisoned too. I can no more. The king's to blame. And with Laertes' dying breath, he tells Hamlet the truth. Claudius goes around like, everybody defend me. I am about to be hurt. Nobody comes to Claudius's defense. Hamlet runs up to him, stabs him, and pours the poison for the wine that his mother drank. Hear thou first, and he says, of course, is about the sex. Hear thou incestuous, murderous, damned Dane, drink off this potion. Is your onion here? Meaning, is that pearl in here? Let's find out. Follow my mother. You're going to die too. Laertes says, he's justly served to everyone as he's dying. It's a poison tempered by himself. Exchange forgiveness with me, noble Hamlet, for killing you now, because I gave you mine and my father's death come not upon thee, nor thine on me. Like, if you forgive me, I won't go to a bad place. And Hamlet gives him, he says, of course, I forgive you. He asks, so, 1 second. Now, Horatio, Hamlet's best friend, has been watching all this, and he's like, I don't want to live either. And he goes to grab the cup to drink the rest of the poison, and Hamlet knocks it out of his hand, and he's like, no, you have to live to tell my story. And then, boom, a big cannon hits the freaking castle. And, well, what do you know? Fortinbras was never going to Poland. Now they're attacking Denmark. And he comes running in. And Hamlet says to Horatio, oh, I die, Horatio. I can't live to hear the news from England. But I do prophecy that who should inherit our kingdom is Fortinbras. So before he dies, he passes the kingdom on to Fortinbras. Not to Horatio, to Fortinbras. He could have given it to Osric, the new Polonius. No, he gives it to his enemy's kingdom. He is my dying voice, so tell Fortinbras that I gave him the kingdom. Horatio says, now cracks a noble heart. Good night, sweet prince, which is that famous line if you've ever heard it. And he says, in flight of angels, sing thee to thy rest. Fortinbras walks in on all these dead bodies, and he's like, what happened? I'm ready for a fight, and it's already over. The ambassador comes to tell nobody, not Claudius, not Hamlet, nobody else, that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. And who cares anymore? And that's that whole existentialist thing that everyone makes a big deal out of. That their deaths are now meaningless. Like, they never really did have meaning. But at least Claudius would have been like, oh, he got me. Or Hamlet would have been like, ha, I got him. But now, they come to say this moment that Hamlet was so happy, and life is meaningless, according to existentialists, right? Horatio says he will tell Fortinbras of the story. Fortinbras then says, set the stage, for he was likely, had he been put on, to prove most royal for his passage, and the soldier's music and rite of war speak loudly for him. So Hamlet gets a soldier's death, which is a really high, great death. He gets a king's death, and that's the end of the play. So, last little bit here, okay? Some analysis. Let me take another drink here. I want you to think about the ending of Hamlet's life, and how inaction really caused all the suffering in this play, except for Claudius, right? It could have been a simple revenge tale, but it wasn't. And here's why. Because Hamlet's in his brain too much. And we have all these character foils of Laertes and Fortinbras to kind of think about that. Had he just killed Claudius when he was asked to, no one else would have died. Denmark wouldn't have been lost either. The kingdom's lost because Hamlet's in his head, right? And it was given to the enemy. So, not only, think about all these people who, I'm Danish, now I'm Norwegian, right? All these things because of Hamlet's indecision. When I used to play basketball, we used to think about this idea, you got to eventually, try to score. You can't just sit there and pass the ball around paralyzed by deciding what you're going to do. You got to take a shot eventually. We used to call that paralysis by analysis, that you're paralyzed by trying to analyze things. You're not going to act. Hamlet is the prototype for paralysis by analysis. He's paralyzed and nothing good happens. Worrying about, am I going to go to heaven or go to hell, in Shakespeare's opinion, might be the certain way of making the world a hellish place. And you have to be comfortable acting without 100% certainty. Hamlet wants certainty. He wants to know for sure he's doing what's right, or he's for sure doing what's wrong. But Shakespeare's saying you can't live your life according to those terms because you'll never be able to do anything because 100% certainty is impossible. Think about spying and the misinformation it provides. Did the play prove anything that Hamlet didn't already know from the ghost? And even if he wanted to question whether Claudius did it or not, he still didn't act because he saw him praying. He's like, oh, I'm not going to act right now. So like, and then what about all of Claudius's spying? I'm going to spy on Hamlet to find out if he's really mad or not. Did it even tell him anything? Do we even know at the end of this play if someone's gone crazy or not? All those checks, all those spying moments, they prove nothing. In fact, we walk out of this play knowing as much as we did walking into it. Is Hamlet mad? I don't think we can tell. And I think what Shakespeare was saying is be careful with that question. That question leads nowhere. It doesn't. How do you help somebody? That's a question you should answer. But is someone insane? Is someone not insane? Those are questions that kind of lead to more questions, more thoughts. And Shakespeare's saying, what is a diseased mind? Aren't we all? Aren't we all victims to our minds? Shakespeare's also asking us to reconsider what that even means. Whose mind is undiseased? And who's fit to determine those things? What Shakespeare's also showing us is that suicide is always a bad choice and a sign that something is wrong, that someone needs help. The one person who commits suicide in this play isn't even allowed that truth to be told, Ophelia. When she commits suicide, in my opinion, they cover it up. So, I mean, everyone's kind of talking about suicide, but there isn't any allowed to happen. Their character foils are really important in this play. I've already talked about it. Laertes and Fortinbras all action. Hamlet's all thought. Look at Laertes and Fortinbras at the end of this play, and how do you think of them? Look at Hamlet at the end of this play, and how do you think too much thought caused problems? Ophelia and Hamlet are thinkers, and look what happens to them. Look what happens to their brains that they're using that thinking for. Laertes and Fortinbras are actors, and they use their bodies, and look what happens to their bodies. One of them survives. They all receive the same fate, and so do we, which is death, except for Fortinbras. Ophelia and Gertrude die for their connection to these three men. So in that way, there's this kind of almost feminist moment here where Shakespeare's kind of showing that women shouldn't live for men. We shouldn't build societies like that. They are their own, because Gertrude and Ophelia are both trying to survive in a world that they're drowning in. And they both use different tactics. But both those tactics are attaching themselves to men, and they both die. A woman's worth has to be beyond their connections to men. In effect, some people say that we're all Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, these kind of side characters in our lives. We're not kings. We're all bearing our deaths with us. We don't know when we're going to die. Just like we're doing our jobs and maybe something falls on us. Who knows when we die? But they still acted. They still just did what they needed to do. We don't know when we're going to die, but we should live our lives like they did, in existence, in the moment, not worrying about whose side we're on, but just doing what we think we should be doing. Hamlet, I think, is the most sympathetic domestic terrorist in history, in the literature. We get to understand him so closely and intimately. We may feel injured by that comparison, especially when we compare him to domestic terrorists. But those people are humans too, even though they're awful ones. And we keep them unrelatable when we talk about them because we're afraid to say that I am human like they are. I don't want to think about what I have in common with Osama bin Laden. However, I have a lot in common with him. We're both vertebrates. We're both humans. We both lived at the same time. But if I keep him distant from me, I feel better about who I am and the monster that he is. Shakespeare creates in Hamlet at once an antagonist and a protagonist. I don't think Claudius is his enemy. Claudius is dispatched so unceremoniously. He's killed off, and it's like there's no great battle. There's no Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker thing. It begs the question, who was Hamlet's real enemy? And I think the answer is himself. That we are our own worst enemies and our saviors. There's no great battle. Shakespeare seems to be pointing to us, ourselves, as the great villains and heroes of our own lives, which makes our overthinking, our rash decisions, our states of sanity and madness, the way we treat our loved ones, the way we neglect each other, the way we create misinformation and isolate ourselves online with analysis. He makes analysis the great tragedy of each of our lives. If Hamlet teaches us something, it's that great intelligence is not enough to overcome the devil of our nature, that we have to act. That's our job. And that it's scary because making mistakes when we act come at high costs. But like Fortinbras, perhaps we can be redeemed and restored. And like Laertes, even fighting nobly for the wrong side may say more about us in the end than the side we chose. But if we refuse to engage to act, if we sit on our brains as prisoners in our thoughts, in our skulls, and sit in there and unable to move around because we have to do more thinking, we never even get to think because we become distracted by our cell phones, by our video games, by lust, by drugs, by food, by any diversion that you want to say, then the great loves of our life and the great purposes we might have fulfilled will also die tragically. Our lives are ultimately questions of who we are. Who are we going to be? We must act and decide to become those people, for better or worse, looking out into the great darkness of that unknowable future beyond all the things that we already know, this dark chasm of a future. It's scary. We must ask ourselves the same question that Hamlet asks. The same question that Shakespeare asks at the beginning of this play, the first line. Who is there? And after we ask that question, we have to act in order to answer it and show who we are. All right, man, that's Hamlet. I'm done talking about it. I hope y'all are giving you a lot to think about with your papers. Email me if you need any help with that. We're going to start reading short stories this week. So I hope you enjoy Updike's A&P, and you'll have a smaller video about that. Have a great day.